In the windswept plains of Wyoming Territory, 1875, a pregnant widow's desperate scream pierces the night as flames devour her homestead. Sarah Mitchell clutches her swollen belly, watching helplessly as ruthless rustlers destroy everything she and her late husband built. But word of this atrocity travels fast across the frontier, reaching the ears of a man who once promised to protect them both. Legendary gunslinger James Hawkins. 10 years ago, he rode away to escape his feelings for the woman his best friend married. Now, he's coming back with a vengeance, tracking the rustlers who dared harm what he holds dear. But can a man who spent a decade running from his heart find the courage to fight for love again? Sarah Mitchell twisted the gold band on her finger, its once bright surface dulled by daily work, but no less precious. 6 months a widow, and still she caught herself turning to share Thomas's favorite jokes, to ask his opinion on the spring. Blunting, to feel his strong hands steadying her back as her pregnancy progressed. The modest cabin they'd built together stood as his last gift to her, every hand-hewn beam and carefully fitted board a testament to his love. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, catching the tin coffee pot Thomas had brought her from Cheyenne. She'd scolded him for spending precious money on such a frivolity, but he'd just grinned that boyish grin of his. "Nothing's too good for my best girl," he'd said, pulling her close. Now she treasured every small reminder of him, each object holding memories of their brief but joy-filled marriage. Outside, the Wyoming wind whistled through the prairie grass, carrying the promise of spring. Sarah rested one hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby's morning kicks. "Your papa would have loved you something fierce," she whispered, then straightened her shoulders. There was work to be done, and Thomas Mitchell hadn't married a woman who shied from hard labor. The small herd of cattle they'd built together still needed tending, though she'd had to sell off half after Thomas's passing. What remained was enough to see her through, if she was careful. The neighboring Crawfords helped when they could, their teenage sons riding over to assist with the heaviest work. But Sarah prided herself on managing most tasks alone. She'd learned to shoot straight years ago, growing up on her own father's ranch. Thomas had loved that about her, said he'd never met a woman who could outshoot him and still make the finest biscuits west of the Mississippi. The rifle above. The door gave her comfort now, knowing she could protect herself and her unborn child if needed. The general store in town had offered to buy her out more than once. "A woman in your condition shouldn't be running a ranch alone," Milton Pierce had said just yesterday, his concern genuine but patronizing. "Think of the child." Sarah thought of little else, truth be told. But this land, this home, it was her baby's inheritance, the future Thomas had died building. She wouldn't sell out of fear or convenience. Her morning routine was well established now. Check the water barrel, feed the chickens, milk the cow, all before the heat of the day set in. Her body moved with practiced efficiency, though her advancing pregnancy made every task take longer than it once had. The doctor in town had warned her about overexertion, but Sarah knew her limits. As she worked, her mind drifted to the past, to the day Thomas had first brought her to this plot of land. It had been nothing but open prairie then, beautiful in its wildness. "Just think, Sarah girl," he'd said, his eyes alight with dreams. "Our children will grow up here, strong and free as wild horses." He'd been so alive then, so full of plans. Neither of them could have known he'd never see his first child born. The fever had taken him quick. Too quick for the doctor to arrive from town, too quick for proper goodbyes. Just 3 days from first cough to last breath, leaving Sarah with a half-built dream and a growing belly. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her reverie. Sarah shaded her eyes against the morning sun, watching as 2 riders approached from the direction of town. She recognized Ben Crawford's lanky form, but the other rider was a stranger, his hat pulled low against the wind. "Morning, Ms. Mitchell," Ben called out as they drew closer. At 17, he was trying hard to sound like a man grown. "Pa sent me to help with that loose board on your barn roof. Brought Mr. Watson here from the bank to look at some papers, if you don't mind." Sarah's hand tightened on her worn wedding ring. The bank had been pressing about the mortgage lately, though she'd never missed a payment. "I'll put on some coffee," she said, keeping her voice steady. She wouldn't show weakness, not to the bankman, not to anyone. Inside, as she stoked the fire and set the coffee to boil, Sarah caught her reflection in the window glass. She saw what others must see, a woman too young for widowhood, too stubborn for sense, her mother would have said. But she also saw Thomas's dream in her eyes, his strength in the set of her jaw. This was her home, her future, her child's birthright, and she would fight to keep it, whatever came. Straightening her apron, Sarah reached for the tin of store-bought cookies she saved for company. The wrestling match ahead would require all her courage and cunning, but she was Thomas Mitchell's widow, and she knew how to stand her ground. The baby kicked again as if in agreement, and Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They would endure, she and this child. They would make Thomas proud. James Hawkins sat alone in a dimly lit corner of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Cheyenne, his weathered fingers tracing the outline of a tarnished badge. 10 years of dust had settled into its crevices, but the star still caught what little lamplight reached his table. Sheriff of Paradise Valley, a title he'd given up the day he rode away from Sarah Mitchell's wedding. The whiskey in his glass remained untouched. He'd ordered it more out of habit than desire, his mind elsewhere since overhearing the trader's conversation an hour ago. Their words still echoed in his ears. Sarah Mitchell's cabin, burned to the ground. Thomas dead these 6 months. Sarah alone with child. The badge felt heavier than it had any right to. He'd sworn an oath once, not just to the law, but to Thomas Mitchell himself. "Keep her safe if anything happens to me," Thomas had said, that last night before the fever took him. Word traveled slow on the frontier, but it had finally reached James, and with it the weight of a promise unfulfilled. A decade's worth of memories crashed over him like a flash flood. Sarah, laughing at some fool joke he'd told, her eyes dancing in the summer sunset. Thomas, his best friend since boyhood, clapping him on the back after they'd driven off cattle rustlers together. The way his heart had threatened to burst the day Thomas announced his engagement to the very woman James had been too cowardly to court. The door swung open, bringing with it a gust of night air and trail boss Marcus Cooper, his expression grim. "Thought I'd find you here, Hawk." He settled his considerable bulk into the chair across from James. "Heard about Paradise Valley?" James nodded once, sharp and tight. "The Rustlers. Any word on who?" "Clayton Bunch, most likely. They've been pushing north, taking advantage of widows and homesteaders who can't fight back. Working with some of the bigger ranchers, way I hear it." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Word is they're trying to drive folks off their land. Something about the railroad coming through." The pieces clicked into place like chambers in a well-oiled revolver. James had heard whispers about the railroad surveys, had seen the way certain cattle barons' eyes lit up at the mention of new rail lines. Land that had been worthless suddenly held the promise of fortune, if a man was willing to bloody his hands to claim it. "Sarah won't sell," James said, certain as sunrise. "Not while she draws breath." Marcus's expression darkened. "That's what worries me, old friend. These boys, they don't much care about leaving witnesses. Next time they might not stop at burning." "The barn." James's hand closed around the badge, its edges biting into his palm. 10 years ago, he'd run from his feelings like a coward, telling himself it was noble to step aside for his best friend's happiness. He'd wandered from Montana to Mexico, taking whatever work came his way, trying to forget the way Sarah's smile could light up a room. But he couldn't run from this. Not from a promise made to a dying friend. Not from the thought of Sarah alone against men who'd burn a widow's home. "My gear still at your place?" James stood, leaving the untouched whiskey on the table. Marcus nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his weathered face. "Your old mare, too. Been keeping her fit, just in case." "Just in case," James echoed, feeling the familiar weight of duty settling across his shoulders. He slipped the badge into his pocket, where it sat like a stone against his heart. The man who'd worn it was long gone, but perhaps some part of him, the part that had sworn to protect the innocent, to stand against evil, perhaps that part still lived. Outside, the spring wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. James paused on the boardwalk, his eyes drawn north toward Paradise Valley. Somewhere out there, Sarah Mitchell faced the darkness alone, not knowing help was coming, not knowing that the man who'd loved her in silence for so long was finally coming home. He'd failed her once, choosing the coward's path of running away. He wouldn't fail her again. The Clayton gang was about to learn what happened to men who threatened what James Hawkins had sworn to protect. Tomorrow he'd ride for Paradise Valley, and this time he wouldn't leave until every last threat to Sarah and her child was buried deep in Wyoming soil. Sarah knelt in the ashes of her home, carefully lifting a blackened leather cover from the debris. The Mitchell family Bible had survived, though its edges were scorched and its pages smoke-stained. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing the family record page, where Thomas had proudly inscribed their wedding date in his bold hand. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her close the Bible quickly, tucking it into her apron pocket. She'd taken shelter with the Crawfords, but returned daily to salvage what she could from the ruins. Each trip felt like reopening a wound, but she couldn't bear to abandon the last traces of her life with Thomas. "Ma'am," the voice froze her in place, deep, familiar as her own heartbeat, though she hadn't heard it in 10 years. Sarah turned slowly, one hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. James Hawkins sat atop a dun mare, looking as though he'd ridden straight out of her memories. The years had weathered him, carved deep lines around his eyes, but those eyes themselves hadn't changed. Still that startling shade of blue that had once made her young heart skip. "You're too late," she said, the words coming out sharper than intended. "There's nothing left to protect." James dismounted with the same fluid grace she remembered, though she noted a slight favoring of his left leg. "There's you," he said, simply. "There's your child." The tenderness in his voice threatened to crack her careful composure. Sarah turned back to the ruins, blinking hard. "I don't need your protection, James Hawkins. I've managed fine these past 10 years. Have you?" His boots crunched on the charred remains of her home. "Because from where I stand, it looks like the Clayton gang just burned you out. They won't stop here, Sarah. They want the land, and they don't care who they hurt to get it." She whirled to face him, anger flaring. "And you care? Where were you when Thomas died? When I had to sell half our herd to keep the mortgage paid? When—" Her voice broke and she pressed her lips together, fighting for control. James took the verbal blows without flinching, though something flickered in his eyes. "I was wrong to stay away. Thomas asked me to look after you before he died. I only just got word." "Thomas asked—" Sarah's hand went to the Bible in her pocket, feeling its familiar weight. Of course he had. Thomas, who'd always seen the best in everyone, who'd never understood why his best friend had vanished after the wedding. A distant rifle crack split the air. James moved with stunning speed, pulling Sarah behind a standing section of wall as bullets kicked up dust where she'd been standing. She found herself pressed against his chest, the steady thud of his heart a counterpoint to her racing pulse. "3 riders," he murmured, his breath stirring her hair. "Coming in fast from the north." His hand brushed her arm. "Can you run?" Sarah pulled away, straightening her spine. "I can shoot." She withdrew a small derringer from her pocket. "Thomas made sure I was never unarmed." A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. "That sounds like him." He drew his own revolver, the well-worn grip fitting his hand like it had grown there. "Stay low. Make for the barn foundation. There's better cover there." The riders were closer now, their hoofbeats thundering across the prairie. Sarah recognized the lead rider. She'd seen him in town, drinking with the men who'd been pressuring her to sell. Clayton's enforcer, though she didn't know his name. "Last chance, Widow Mitchell," the man's voice carried across the ruins. "Sell now, or there won't be enough left of you to bury." James's expression hardened, and Sarah saw the shadow of the lawman he'd once been. "That's Jack Ketchum," he said quietly. "Clayton's dog. 3 murders to his name, but nothing that would stick in court. 4, if he has his way. Sarah's hand tightened on her derringer. Not while I draw breath. James's voice held the weight of an oath. He stepped out from behind the wall, his gun held casually at his side. Morning, Jack. Still running errands for better men? The riders pulled up short. Sarah saw recognition and something like fear flash across Ketchum's face. Hawkins, heard you was dead. You heard wrong. James's tone was conversational, but Sarah recognized the deadly intent beneath it. Now, seems to me you boys are trespassing on this lady's property. I suggest you ride out while you still can. Ketchum's hand twitched toward his gun. There's 3 of us, Hawkins. Even you can't. The rest of his sentence was lost in the explosion of gunfire. James moved like lightning, his first shot taking Ketchum's hat off, the second knocking the gun from his hand. The other riders wheeled their horses, firing wildly as they retreated. Sarah's derringer barked twice, and one man clutched his arm. With a howl of pain, in seconds it was over. The riders disappeared over the rise, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats. James holstered his gun with the same deadly grace with which he'd drawn it. "They'll be back," he said, turning to Sarah, "with more men." She nodded, her heart still racing. "I know." She withdrew the Bible from her pocket, running her fingers over its scorched cover. "But this is my home, James. Our home. Thomas's dream." She met his eyes squarely. "I won't run." Something softened in his expression. "No," he said quietly, "you never did." He looked around at the ruins, his jaw set. "Then we'll rebuild. Stronger this time. And when Clayton's men come back, they'll find more than one gun waiting." Sarah opened the Bible to the family record page, where Thomas's bold handwriting recorded their life together. Below their wedding date, she'd recently added another entry. Child expected, spring 1875. "You don't have to stay," she said, not looking up. "This isn't your fight." James stepped closer, his shadow falling across the page. "Yes," he said simply, "it is." His hand touched the Bible gently, fingers brushing hers. "Thomas knew what was coming. That's why he asked me. To protect you. He knew Clayton's bunch would try something like this." Sarah looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "The railroad's coming, Sarah, right through Paradise Valley. That's what this is all about. Clayton's been buying up land all along the proposed route, or running people off it." His eyes met hers. "Thomas found out somehow. That's why they waited until after he was gone." The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Thomas's sudden illness, the pressure to sell, the burning of her home. "They killed him," she whispered. "The fever. It wasn't natural." James's hand tightened on the Bible. "We'll prove it," he promised. "And they'll pay for every bit of harm they've done. But first, we need to keep you and the little one safe." Sarah closed the Bible, tucking it back into her pocket where it rested against her heart. "Very well, James Hawkins," she said. "Show me how we rebuild." In the fading light of dusk, Sarah sorted through a charred trunk she'd pulled from the ruins, her heart catching at each small treasure discovered. At the bottom, protected by layers of quilts, she found what she hadn't dared hope had survived, a cedar box containing her most precious possessions. Inside, beneath letters and dried flowers, lay a photograph taken the summer before her. Wedding. 3 young faces smiled up at her, Thomas in the middle, his arm around her waist, and James standing slightly apart, his eyes fixed on something beyond the camera's lens. She remembered that day. The county fair, the heat of August, the way James had tried to excuse himself from the picture before Thomas insisted. I'd forgotten about that. James's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway of the Crawfords, a barn where they'd set up temporary shelter. Thomas wore that ridiculous string tie he'd bought from a traveling salesman, said it made him look distinguished. Sarah smiled despite herself, touching Thomas's face in the photograph. "You both humored him so." James moved closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. He had that way about him. Could talk anyone into anything. He paused, studying the picture. "I've never known a better man." Sarah looked up at him. really looked, seeing the weight of grief he carried. "Why did you leave, James? After the wedding, Thomas missed you terribly." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was rough. "Because I couldn't trust myself to stay. Not with—" He gestured helplessly at the photograph. "Thomas saw the best in everyone, even me. He never realized—" "That you love me too?" Sarah's words hung in the air between them. James's shoulders stiffened. "It doesn't matter now, doesn't it?" She stood carefully, one hand supporting her back. 10 years is a long time to run from the truth, James Hawkins. He turned away, his profile sharp against the dying light. "I'm not here for that, Sarah. I made a promise to Thomas, and I aim to keep it, nothing more." A kick from the baby made Sarah catch her breath, drawing James's instant attention. His hand reached out automatically before dropping back to his side. The gesture stirred something. In her, memory perhaps, or possibility. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "The baby's active tonight," she said softly. Would you like to feel?" Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years fell away. James stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a wild thing that might startle. When Sarah took his weathered hand and placed it against her belly, his breath caught. "Strong," he whispered as the baby kicked again. "Like its mama." Sarah found herself studying his face, the new lines around his eyes, the silver threading his temples, the same gentle strength she remembered. "Thomas would have wanted you here," she said, "not just now, but all along. He never understood why his best friend disappeared." Pain flickered across James's features. "I wrote him letters, never sent them." His hand lingered a moment longer before withdrawing. "Tried to explain what I couldn't say to his face, that watching you two together was more than I could bear. And now? Now I'm here to protect what he loved most." James straightened, professional distance returning to his stance. "Clayton's men won't wait long to try again. We need to prepare." Sarah let him retreat behind duty's shield, understanding too well the need for emotional armor. She tucked the photograph back into its box, but not before noticing what she'd missed before. The way James's eyes in the picture weren't looking beyond the camera at all. They were looking at her. The next few days fell into a pattern. James spent mornings riding the property boundaries, checking for signs of Clayton's men. Afternoons were devoted to salvaging what they could from the ruins and planning the rebuild. The Crawfords' barn became a war room of sorts, with James teaching Sarah's teenage neighbors the finer points of defensive positioning. Word spread through the valley. Other small ranchers who'd faced pressure from Clayton's outfit began stopping by, sharing information and offering help. Sarah watched James with them, saw how naturally he took command while making each person feel heard. The sheriff he'd once been shown through, tempered by years of hard-won wisdom. She found herself watching him at odd moments. The way he'd pause to help Mrs. Crawford with her heavy washing, how he'd spend hours teaching young Ben Crawford to track and shoot, his gentle manner with the skittish horses. This was a different James than the intense young lawman she'd known, yet somehow more himself than ever. One evening, as they sat on the Crawfords' porch reviewing their progress, Sarah caught him looking at her with an expression that mirrored the one in the old photograph. "You can't protect me forever, James," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, surprising her. "But I can teach you to protect yourself better, and I can make sure you're not alone when Clayton makes his move." Sarah touched the cedar box in her lap, feeling the weight of the photograph inside. "I wasn't alone before. I had Thomas's memory and this child and my own strength." "I know." James's voice held respect and something more. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Sarah Mitchell. Maybe that's why." He stopped, looking out over the darkening valley. "Why what? Why leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done." He stood, his hand brushing her shoulder briefly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start rebuilding your home. Sarah watched him walk away, his straight-backed figure merging with the twilight. The baby kicked again, and she smiled, remembering the wonder in James's eyes when he'd felt it. Perhaps some things, like the photograph in her box, could survive fire and time unchanged. Perhaps others, like trust and friendship, could be rebuilt stronger than before. Milton Pierce's body lay face down in the mud behind his general store, a bullet hole in his back telling its own story. James knelt beside him, gently turning him over while Sarah stood watch, her derringer ready. In the dead man's hand was clutched a leather document pouch, its contents spilling onto the rain-soaked ground. "He tried to warn me," Sarah whispered, remembering Pierce's awkward attempts to convince her to sell. "All those times he pressed me to leave, he wasn't working with Clayton at all." James carefully gathered the scattered papers, his expression darkening as he read. "No, he was trying to protect you. Look at this." He handed her a document, its official seals stark against the weathered paper. Land deed transfers, all along the proposed railroad route. Clayton's been forging signatures, claiming people sold willingly. Sarah's hands trembled as she recognized names. The Hendersons, the Wilsons, they didn't sell. They were driven out, just like, her voice caught, just like they tried with you. James stood, tucking the documents into his coat. Pierce must have discovered the forgeries. Being the county clerk, he would have known the real signatures. A sound from the alley's entrance had them both turning, weapons ready. But it was only young Ben Crawford, his face pale in the early morning light. "Mr. Hawkins, riders coming. Lots of them. Pa sent me to warn you." James's hand fell to his gun belt. "How many? 15, maybe 20. Clayton himself is leading. Them." Ben's voice cracked with urgency. "They're heading for the Mitchell place." Sarah's heart lurched. "The proof, Thomas's letter, it's still in the cabin ruins." James caught her arm as she started forward. "What letter?" "I found it yesterday, hidden in the Bible's binding. Thomas wrote about the railroad, about Clayton's schemes. He was gathering evidence." She met James's eyes. "That's why they killed him, isn't it? Not just for the land, but to silence him." Understanding and fury warred in James's expression. "That's why the fever came on so sudden. They must have poisoned him." His hand tightened on his gun belt. "Ben, ride for the sheriff in Cheyenne. Show him what we found on Pierce. Sarah, you head for the Crawfords' place." "No," Sarah lifted her chin. "That letter is all I have left to prove what they did to Thomas. I'm coming with you." "Sarah, my husband died for this truth, James Hawkins. I won't hide while you face it alone." Something shifted in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or remembrance of the girl who'd once outshot him at the county fair. "All right, but you stay behind me, and if I say run, I'm not running anymore." They rode hard for the Mitchell property, thunder rumbling overhead like distant artillery. The spring storm that had been threatening all morning was rolling in, and with it, Clayton's men. Sarah could see dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the north, just as Ben had warned. The cabin ruins loomed ahead, black timbers stark against the grey sky. Sarah dismounted quickly, hurrying to where she'd hidden the family Bible among the foundation stones. Her fingers found the familiar leather binding just as the first drops of rain began to fall. James positioned himself near the standing wall, his rifle ready. "How long will it take you to find it?" "I know exactly where." Sarah's words cut off as she opened the Bible. The binding had been slit open, the hidden letter gone. "No, looking for this?" The voice was cultured, almost gentle. Herbert Clayton stepped out from behind a charred beam, Thomas's letter in his manicured hand. Two armed men flanked him, rifles aimed at James. "I must say, Mrs. Mitchell, your late husband was quite thorough in his documentation of my business." "Your practices?" Sarah straightened slowly, conscious of James's tension beside her. Clayton was exactly as she remembered from town meetings, elegant despite the frontier setting, his silver hair and fine clothes marking him as a man of wealth and influence. Only his eyes betrayed him, cold as a rattler's. "Did you kill Milton Pierce too?" James's voice carried across the ruins. "Or just order it done, like you did with Thomas Mitchell." Clayton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Pierce was unfortunate, but necessary. Just like poor Thomas. The railroad's coming, whether you like it or not. Progress can't be stopped by sentiment." He held the letter over a match. "And now, the last evidence of my irregularities will disappear, just like you both." The crack of a rifle shot split the air. Clayton's match went flying as blood bloomed on his hand. More shots followed as riders appeared on the ridge. Ben Crawford had returned, not with the sheriff, but with half the valley's small ranchers. What followed was chaos. Clayton's men opened fire, forcing Sarah and James behind the wall. Return. Fire from the ridge kept the attackers from rushing their position, but Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before they were flanked. "The letter," she gasped between shots. "He dropped it when—" "I see it." James's eyes fixed on the paper, lying in the open between them and Clayton's position. "Cover me." Before she could protest, he was moving, low and fast, through the rain. Sarah fired her derringer at any movement she saw, trying to keep Clayton's men down. James reached the letter, snatched it up, and then Clayton himself appeared, pistol aimed at James's back. Sarah didn't think. She threw her empty derringer with all her strength, striking Clayton's arm. His shot went wide as James spun, his own gun roaring. Clayton fell, clutching his shoulder, and the tide turned. His men, seeing their leader down, began to retreat. In the aftermath, as the rain washed blood and gun smoke from the ruins of her home, Sarah read Thomas's letter aloud to the gathered ranchers. Her husband's words, clear and damning, laid out Clayton's entire scheme. The forged deeds, the murders disguised as accidents, the bribes paid to officials. "This is what Thomas died for," she said finally, looking at James. "The truth." He nodded, his eyes holding hers. "And now everyone will know it." The letter, along with Pierce's discovered documents, would be enough to bring Clayton to justice. But as Sarah stood in the ruins of her old life, she realized something had shifted. The truth hadn't just exposed Clayton's crimes. It had brought her neighbors together, shown her who she could trust. And it had brought James Hawkins back into her life, for better or worse. The map spread across the Crawfords' kitchen table, its corners weighted with cups of cooling coffee. James's precise hand had marked every ridge, valley, and water source in Paradise Valley, transforming memory and experience into a tactical advantage. Sarah watched as he added another notation, his weathered fingers tracing the path where Clayton's men were most likely to approach. "They'll come through Devil's Gap," he said, tapping the narrow pass marked in red ink. "It's the only way to move a large group without being seen from the homesteads." Ben Crawford leaned forward, his young face serious. "But that's where the old mining camp is. Pa always said it was too dangerous to ride through there." "Exactly." James's eyes met Sarah's across the table. "Which is why it's perfect for our purpose." Sarah studied the map, remembering summer rides with Thomas through those same hills. The support beams in those mines were rotting even 3 years ago. One good blast could bring the whole pass down, James finished, block their main approach and force them to come at us from open ground. Old Samuel Henderson, who'd lost his ranch to Clayton's schemes months ago, cleared his throat. "Won't do much good if they've got men inside the valley already. Word is Clayton's bought himself some witnesses, plans to testify we all sold willing like." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her belly as the baby kicked. "Then we need to find those witnesses before the circuit judge arrives." James nodded, adding another mark to the map. "Clayton's got a hunting lodge here, up by Timber Creek. Remote, defensible, perfect place to hide people you don't want." "Found." "I know it," Ben said eagerly. "Used to trap up there with Pa. There's a back trail through the aspens, hardly wide enough for a horse. Clayton's men wouldn't know about it." Sarah watched the boy's face, seeing the same eager determination she remembered in Thomas's eyes whenever he spoke of standing up to Clayton's outfit. "It's too dangerous, Ben. Your mother would never forgive us." "I'm not asking permission, Mrs. Mitchell." Ben straightened, suddenly looking older than his 17 years. "Mr. Mitchell taught me to read when Pa was laid up with his broken leg. said education was the key to a better future. I aim to repay that kindness. James studied the young man thoughtfully. We'll need someone who knows that back trail, but you follow orders exactly, understand? No heroics. The planning continued as afternoon stretched into evening. Sarah found herself drawn into the tactical discussions, her knowledge of the land proving as valuable as James's strategic experience. Together, they crafted a plan that relied more on cunning than force, using the valley itself as their ally. The judge arrives in 3 days, James said finally, rolling up the map with care. Clayton's men will move before then, try to silence any witnesses and destroy the evidence we gathered. We need to be ready. Sarah touched the spot on the map, marking her burned cabin. I won't leave, not even temporarily. Wasn't going to. Suggest it. James's voice was quiet. You're safer with us than anywhere else, but Sarah... He hesitated. If anything happens, nothing will happen. She met his concerned gaze steadily. This child will be born in a proper home, on Mitchell land, with a proper future. Thomas believed in that future enough to die for it. I believe in it enough to fight for it. Later, after the others had gone, Sarah found James still studying. The map by lamplight. New marks dotted the paper, escape routes, fallback positions, carefully planned layers of defense that spoke of years of hard-won experience. Where did you learn all this? She asked, settling into a chair beside him. During those 10 years away? He was quiet for a moment, his finger tracing a line that led nowhere. Spent some time with the Army Scouts down in Apache country. Learned how to read land, how to think like someone hunting you. Learned there's always another way out if you know where to look. And where were you looking, James? All those years. The lamplight caught the silver in his hair, the new lines around his eyes. Doesn't matter now. I'm where I need to be. Sarah reached out, her hand covering his where it rested on the map. Yes, she said softly. You are. He turned his hand. Under hers, their fingers intertwining for a brief moment before he gently pulled away. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start moving people into position. But Sarah lingered, watching as he made one final mark on the map, a small star beside. Her burned cabin. What's that for? Hope, he said simply. Where we'll rebuild after this is over. Something warm unfurled in her chest, like spring thaw after a long winter. We? James looked up, and in his eyes she saw the same steady promise she'd once seen in Thomas's. If you'll have my help, I'd have more than that, she said quietly, if you're brave enough to offer it. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. James's hand trembled slightly as he rolled the map, his voice rough. One battle at a time, Sarah Mitchell. Let's win this one first. She nodded, understanding. Some wounds needed time to heal, some bridges needed careful rebuilding. But as she walked to her borrowed room, she felt stronger than she had since the night her cabin burned. They had a plan, they had allies, and most importantly, they had each other. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, looking at James's careful map, with its marks of strategy and hope, Sarah allowed herself to believe in more than survival. She believed in victory. Dawn found James Hawkins at the Crawfords' barn, methodically cleaning his gun belt in the grey light. Each bullet, each worn piece of leather held memories he'd rather forget. The belt had been a gift from Thomas, back when James first pinned on a sheriff's badge. Every lawman needs proper tools, Thomas had said, grinning as he handed over the hand-tooled leather. The sound of boots on wooden planks made him look up. Sarah stood in the doorway, her silhouette softened by early light. You're up early? She said, moving closer. Never really slept. James returned to his work, trying not to notice how she eased herself onto a hay bale, one hand supporting her back. The pregnancy was wearing on her, though she'd never admit it. Bad dreams. His hands stilled on the leather. Old ones. He could feel her waiting, patient as the Wyoming wind that shaped the prairies. Back in Apache country, I saw a woman. Reminded me of you. Young widow trying to hold on to her land. Local cattle baron wanted it. What happened? I tried to help, thought I could save her like I couldn't." He swallowed hard. "Like I couldn't save Thomas. But I was too late. Baron's men got to her first." Sarah's voice was gentle. "Is that why you came back? To save me?" James looked down at the gun belt, at the notches he'd carved over the years, each one a life taken, each one a weight on his soul. "I came back because Thomas asked me to protect you, but seeing you again, seeing your strength." He met her eyes. "You don't need saving, Sarah Mitchell." "Never did." "No," she agreed. "But I might need a friend, someone to share the burden." He almost smiled. "That what we are? Friends? We were once, before you ran away." The words hit harder than any bullet. "I didn't run. I left because you loved me?" Sarah's directness had always been one of her gifts. "And you thought that betrayed Thomas?" James stood abruptly, pacing the length of the barn. "I was his best friend. Should have been there for both of you, not—" He gestured helplessly, "not wanting what wasn't mine to want." "James." Something in her voice made him turn. "Come here." Slowly, like a man approaching judgment, he moved to stand before her. Sarah reached for the gun belt in his hands, her fingers tracing the worn leather. "Thomas knew," she said quietly. "The night before our wedding, he told me he thought you might leave. Said you were too honorable for your own good sometimes." James felt the air leave his lungs. He knew you loved me. Knew I'd had feelings for you too before you stepped aside." Sarah's eyes held his. He wasn't blind, James. He just believed love wasn't something that had to be divided to be shared. "Sarah," his voice was rough, "don't." "Why not?" "Because you think you don't deserve happiness. Because you're still punishing yourself for surviving when Thomas didn't." Each word struck true, finding marks he thought he'd hidden. "I should have been here. When he got sick, when you needed—" "Yes." Sarah's hand found his, warm and sure. "You should have been, but you're here now." The gun belt lay across their joined hands, its leather darkened by years and use. James looked at it, really looked, seeing not just the weight of past failures, but the possibility of future protection. "Clayton's men will come soon," he said. "They won't stop until we stop them." Sarah's grip tightened. Together. This time. The baby chose that moment to kick, and Sarah gasped softly. Without thinking, James knelt beside her, his free hand moving to support her back. The position brought them face to face, close enough to share breath. "I'm not the same man who left," he warned. "Good." Sarah's eyes held a hint of her old mischief. "I'm not the same woman you left behind." The morning light strengthened, painting the barn in shades of gold. Outside, they could hear the Crawfords starting their day, horses nickering, life going on despite the shadow of coming violence. James looked down at the gun belt, at his hand entwined with Sarah's. When this is over," she said firmly, "we'll talk about everything, about the past, about Thomas, about—" She pressed his hand to her belly, where the baby kicked again. "About the future." He nodded, something tight in his chest easing. Standing, he buckled on, the gun belt with practiced motion. Its weight felt different now, not just a burden of past regrets, but a tool for protecting what mattered. "I need to check the mine preparations," he said. "Make sure the charges are set right." "I'll come with you." Sarah started to rise, but he held out a hand. "Rest, please, for the little one's sake, if not your own." She settled back, though he could see the protest in her eyes. "James?" He turned at the door, watching as she ran her fingers over the leather of his gun belt where it had lain across her lap. "Thomas was right about you," she said softly. "You are too honorable for your own good, but that's one of the reasons we both loved you." The words followed him into the morning light, warming him more surely than the rising sun. He had demons enough to fill a church, but for the first time in 10 years, he felt something like peace. The gun belt rode easy on his hips as he mounted up, its familiar weight a reminder not of what he'd lost, but of what he might yet protect, what he might yet build, if he was brave enough to try. Ben Crawford burst into the barn just before sunset, his horse lathered and heaving. "Mr. Hawkins, found something up by Timber Creek. Clayton's men. They're holding the stolen cattle. There, including Mrs. Mitchell's herd." James looked up from where he'd been checking ammunition supplies. "How many men?" "6, maybe 7. They've got the cattle penned in that narrow canyon, the one with the high walls." Ben's eyes were bright with excitement. "And I saw them using the brands. Mrs. Mitchell's brand, the Hendersons, all of them. They're trying to change the marks before the judge arrives." Sarah emerged from the tack room, her face tight. "Those brands are proof of theft. Without and them, Clayton walks free," James finished. He studied the boy carefully. "You're sure about the number of men?" Ben nodded emphatically. "Counted them twice, just like you taught me. They've got a camp set up near the canyon mouth, but they're sloppy. Don't even post proper guards." James began strapping on his gun belt. "Get your father and Henderson. Tell them to meet us at Devil's Ridge in an hour. We move tonight." After Ben rushed out, Sarah stepped closer. "Us? You're the only one who can identify your cattle for certain, especially with changed brands." He held up a hand as she started to protest. "You'll stay back with Henderson, well away from any fighting. This isn't up for debate, Sarah." She lifted her chin. "The last time someone told me something wasn't up for debate, it was Clayton's man trying to buy my land." Despite the tension of the moment, James felt a smile tug at his lips. "Stubborn woman. You wouldn't have me any other way." Her hand brushed his arm. "Be careful, James. Clayton's men won't be taken easily." The touch lingered on his skin as he rode out with the small group of ranchers. The plan was simple enough. Use the darkness and their knowledge of the land to surround the canyon camp. Take Clayton's men by surprise. But James had learned long ago that simple plans could go wrong in complex ways. They split up near the canyon mouth, Ben leading his father and Henderson to cover the back exit, while James approached from the in front. The spring night was cool and clear, a quarter moon providing just enough light to see by. The first sign something was wrong was the absence of campfire smoke. James reined in, scanning the shadows. Behind him, Sarah shifted on her borrowed horse. "Something's not right," she whispered. Before he could respond, gunfire erupted from the canyon walls. They'd ridden straight into an ambush. "Back!" James shouted, wheeling his horse. "Everyone back to the trees!" More shots rang out, bullets kicking up dirt around them. James saw Sarah's horse rear, heard her cry of alarm. Without thinking, he spurred forward, reaching for her reins. The move saved both their lives. A rifle blast meant for his chest passed through empty air as he lunged sideways. Sarah clung to her saddle horn with one hand, the other pressed protectively against her belly. "Here!" a voice called from the darkness. Ben Crawford appeared at the edge of the tree line, waving them toward a narrow gap between boulders. They made it to cover just as another volley swept the canyon entrance. James helped Sarah dismount, his hands lingering to make sure she was steady. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her face was pale. "The baby's fine, just startled." "Quite a reception," Samuel Henderson commented dryly, joining them behind the rocks. "Seems they were expecting company." James's mind raced. If Clayton's men knew they were coming, then someone had warned them. But Ben had only discovered the cattle hours ago. Understanding hit like a physical blow. "They wanted us to find the cattle. This whole thing is a trap." "But why?" Sarah asked. "They could have just moved the herds, hidden the evidence." "Because Clayton's not just after the cattle." James peered around the boulder, counting muzzle flashes. "He's after us, the witnesses who could testify against him." A bullet sparked off the rock near his head, emphasizing the point. They were pinned down, outnumbered, with night falling fast. The situation looked grim. Then Sarah grabbed his arm. "The old mine shaft." "What?" "There's a played-out silver mine that runs right under this canyon. Thomas showed me once. The entrance is hidden in those trees." Her eyes gleamed in the darkness. "It comes out right behind their position." James studied the terrain with new interest. "Ben, you and your father keep their attention here. Henderson, circle wide. Be ready to cut off any runners." He turned to Sarah. Show me that mine entrance. Then you stay put, understand? She nodded, but there was a familiar stubborn set to her jaw. The brand's in their camp. We need it for evidence. I'll find it. In the dark, James, I know exactly what our brand looks like. I helped Thomas design it. She squeezed his hand. Trust me. 20 minutes later, James emerged from the mine shaft into Clayton's camp, Sarah close behind despite his protests. The men who'd ambushed them were still focused on the canyon entrance, never expecting an attack from their own position. What followed was quick and decisive. James's first shots took down 2 men before they knew what was happening. The others turned to find themselves caught between his gun and Henderson's approaching riders. In the end, 5 of Clayton's men surrendered, 2 lay dead, and 1 fled into the night. But more importantly, they found what they'd come for. The brands, still hot from use, including the distinctive Mitchell mark Thomas had crafted with his own hands. Sarah held her brand in the moonlight, fingers tracing the linked M and heart that Thomas had said represented their joined lives. He was so proud of this design. James watched her, seeing not just grief in her expression, but fierce triumph. We'll need to round up the cattle, get them back to your land before Clayton realizes his plan failed. She nodded, then suddenly swayed. James caught her arm, steadying her. The baby, just tired. But her smile was radiant. We did it, James. First real victory. He helped her mount up, noting how she cradled the brand like something precious. And perhaps it was, not just evidence of Clayton's crimes, but proof that what was stolen could be reclaimed, that what was broken could be rebuilt. As they rode home under the stars, their recovered cattle following behind, James felt something shift inside him. This night had shown him that the past didn't have to define the future, that sometimes what looked like an ambush could become a triumph, and that Sarah Mitchell was still the bravest soul he'd ever known. Sarah was sorting through the ranch's recovered documents when she found it, a torn letter, half hidden between feed receipts and cattle records. The paper was expensive, the kind used by Clayton's bank, but it was the handwriting that made her blood run cold. She recognized those careful loops and flourishes. "James!" Her voice brought him running from the barn, gun drawn. "Look at this!" He holstered his weapon as she handed him the letter, watching his face as he read. The color drained from his features. "Judge Wilson," he said flatly. "He's been working with Clayton all along." Sarah touched the torn edge of the paper where Clayton's signature was barely visible. "The same judge who's supposed to hear our case tomorrow. The one who's going to decide if our evidence against Clayton is enough for an indictment." James crumpled the letter in his fist. This explains how Clayton always stayed one step ahead, how he knew about the ambush at Timber Creek. "We can't. Let him preside over the hearing." Sarah paced the small room, one hand pressed to her lower back, where the baby's weight caused constant aches now. But without a judge, Clayton's men go free. The evidence becomes worthless. James smoothed the letter carefully, studying the words again. $5,000, that's what Wilson's integrity cost. A knock at the door made them both turn. Ben Crawford stood in the doorway, his young face troubled. "Mr. Hawkins, there's something you need to see." They followed him to the Crawford's barn, where his father waited with Samuel Henderson. On a hay bale lay another letter, this one unopened. "Found it in my saddlebags," Henderson said. "Don't recall putting it there." James picked up the envelope, examining the seal. "It's from Clayton." He broke the wax, unfolding the paper inside. As he read, his jaw tightened. "What does it say?" Sarah moved closer, but James held the letter away. "It's nothing. Just threats." "James Hawkins, don't you dare protect me. Not now." Their eyes met in a silent battle of wills before he relented, handing her the letter. Sarah read it slowly, her hand trembling slightly. "He knows about Thomas," she whispered, "about the poison. Says he has proof you were involved." Ben gasped, but James didn't flinch. "It's a lie." "Of course it is." Sarah's voice was steel, but with a corrupt judge, he could make it stick. James took the letter back. his expression grim. Clayton's offering a deal. The evidence against him disappeared, and this proof about Thomas's death never sees light. Samuel Henderson spat into the straw. Blackmail, pure and simple. But why now? Ben asked. Why not use this threat before? Sarah's mind was racing. Because he's desperate. The hearing tomorrow, even with Judge Wilson in his pocket. Clayton needs the evidence gone. A bought judge can only bend the law so far. James was watching her carefully. Sarah? No. She met his gaze squarely. Whatever you're thinking, no. We don't burn evidence. We don't run. We don't make deals. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Knew you'd say that. Then why? Because I needed to hear it. He turned to the others. Ben, ride for Cheyenne. Find Marshal Cooper. He's an old friend. Tell him what we found about Wilson. Mr. Henderson, spread the word. I want every rancher who's been wronged by Clayton in town tomorrow. What are you planning? Sarah asked as the others hurried out. James held up both letters, Wilson's torn confession and Clayton's threat. These prove conspiracy at the highest level of local government. That makes it a federal matter. Marshal Cooper can supersede Wilson's authority, take custody of the evidence. If Ben reaches him in time, he will. James's confidence was absolute. That boy rides like the wind itself. Sarah touched the torn letter, thinking of all the lives Clayton had destroyed, all the justice that had been denied. And if he doesn't, then we do this the hard way. James's hand fell to his gun belt. Clayton's men are still out there. They'll try to stop Ben from reaching Cheyenne. You're going after him. It wasn't a question, but James nodded anyway. Someone needs to watch his back. Sarah straightened, ignoring the protest from her tired body. I'm coming with you. Sarah. No, I won't sit here wondering if Clayton's men got to you both. She held up a hand as he started to protest. I'll stay back, stay safe, but I'm coming. James studied her for a long moment, seeing perhaps what Thomas had always seen, the steel beneath the softness, the unwavering courage that matched his own. We ride in 10 minutes, he said finally. Bundle up warm. It's going to be a long night. As Sarah gathered her things, she caught James staring at Clayton's letter, his expression troubled. What is it? Been wondering who put that letter in Henderson's saddlebag. Someone had to have access to the barn. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. You think we have a traitor? Think we'd be fools not to consider it. He tucked both letters carefully into his coat. Watch yourself tonight. Trust no one but Ben and me. She touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. I trust you, James Hawkins, with my life and my child's. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain or promise, she couldn't tell. Let's make sure that trust isn't misplaced. Outside, the moon was rising over Paradise Valley, painting the prairie in silver light. Somewhere out there, Ben Crawford rode. For justice, carrying their hopes with him, and somewhere Clayton's men were surely riding too, carrying darker purposes. Sarah mounted carefully, settling herself for what would likely be a difficult journey. But as she watched James check his guns one final time, she felt no fear. Whatever came, they would face it together. The torn letter in James's pocket held ugly truths, but it had also shown them the path forward. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, betrayal could light the way to justice, if you were brave enough to follow where it led. The first sharp pain caught Sarah halfway to Cheyenne. She tried to hide it, but James's keen eyes missed nothing. Sarah? He reined his horse closer. It's nothing. She forced a smile, though her knuckles were white on the reins. The babies. Just restless. The lie died as another pain gripped her, stronger this time. James was already dismounting, his face grim in the moonlight. We're stopping. We can't. Ben needs to stay alive. And he's got a 2-hour head start. You need rest. His tone brooked no argument as he helped her down from the saddle. They made camp in a sheltered hollow, James working with swift efficiency to build a small fire. Sarah sat against her saddle, trying to breathe through the waves of discomfort that seemed to be coming faster now. I'll ride back to town, get the doctor, James said. But Sarah caught his arm. No. Clayton's men are watching the roads. If they see you, She gasped as another pain hit. "In my saddlebag. There's a medical kit." James found the worn leather case quickly. Dr. Anderson had given it to her months ago, knowing how far the ranch was from town. "A prepared mother is a safe mother," he'd said, showing her each item and its use. Now James opened it carefully, laying out the contents. Clean bandages, herbs for tea, a small bottle of laudanum. His hands moved with surprising gentleness as he helped her drink the special tea the doctor had prepared. "Thomas's mother was a midwife," Sarah explained, watching him work. "He insisted I learn everything I could about birthing, said a rancher's wife needed to be prepared." "Smart man." James's voice was carefully neutral, but she saw the worry in his eyes. "This is too early, isn't it?" Sarah nodded, her hand resting on her belly. "A few weeks. But sometimes babies have their own ideas about timing." The tea helped ease the pain, but they both knew they couldn't stay here long. Somewhere ahead, Ben rode for Cheyenne and Justice. Behind them, Clayton's men would be closing in. "We need to get you back to town," James said finally. "No." Sarah struggled to sit up straighter. "The hearing is at noon tomorrow. If we turn back now—" "Damn the hearing." Real fear cracked through James's calm facade. "I won't risk you and the baby for what? Justice, the truth about Thomas's murder." Sarah caught his hand, pressing it to her belly where the baby kicked strongly. "This child deserves to be born into a world where men like Clayton can't. By judges and poison-honest ranchers, where the law means something." James was quiet for a long moment, his hand warm against her. Finally, he reached into the medical kit, pulling out a small pamphlet of the doctor's instructions. "Tell me what to watch for," he said. "What signs mean real trouble, not just discomfort." Sarah walked him through the warning signs, trying to ignore the way the pains were changing, becoming more rhythmic. She'd helped birth enough calves and foals to know what was happening. "If the baby comes," she started. "It won't." James's voice was firm. "We'll get you to proper help first." But they both knew it might not be that simple. The night stretched cold and dark around their small camp, and somewhere out there, Clayton's men were hunting. A sound in the darkness brought James to his feet, gun drawn. Sarah reached for her derringer, but he motioned her to stay still. The rider emerged slowly from the shadows, hands raised. "Mr. Hawkins, Mrs. Mitchell." It was young Tommy Henderson, Samuel's boy. "Pa sent me. Clayton's men are watching the main road to Cheyenne, but there's another way, through the old Apache Trail. I can show you." James kept his gun ready. "Your father know you're out here? He's the one who told me where to find you." Tommy's earnest face was clear in the firelight. "Said to tell you the storm breaks at dawn. Said you'd know what that means." James relaxed slightly. It was a code phrase they'd agreed on, known only to their inner circle. "All right, but first, ride back to town. Tell Dr. Anderson." Another. Pain gripped Sarah harder than before. She couldn't quite suppress a gasp. Tommy's eyes widened. "The baby? Just get the doctor," James ordered. "Tell him to follow the Apache Trail. And Tommy, don't tell anyone else where we are." The boy rode off into the darkness, leaving them alone with the fire and their fears. James knelt beside Sarah, his face troubled. "If this is a trap, then we'll face it together." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Like everything else." James began repacking the medical kit with methodical care. "My mother died in childbirth," he said quietly. "That's why, when I saw you were expecting," understanding dawned. "That's why you came back, not just for Thomas's letter or Clayton's crimes. Couldn't bear the thought of history repeating. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Couldn't fail another woman He stopped abruptly. "Another woman you what, James Hawkins?" But before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded in the distance, multiple riders coming fast. James doused the fire with a handful of dirt. "Can you ride?" Sarah struggled to her feet, gritting her teeth against the pain. "I don't think we have a choice." He helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse. The medical kit went into his saddlebag, within easy reach. "Remember what the doctor wrote," he said as they rode out. "Any sign of real trouble." "I know." Sarah guided her, horse alongside his, trying to focus on anything but the increasing pressure in her belly. "James, what you were going to say?" "Later," but his hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently. "When this is over, when you're safe, I'll tell you everything." They rode into the night, following Tommy's directions toward the Apache trail. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer, and within Sarah, new life pressed insistently toward the world, heedless of danger or timing. The medical kit bounced against James's saddle, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Not just justice now, but life itself. The life Thomas had died protecting, the life James had returned to save. Sarah touched her belly, silently willing her child to wait just a little longer. Dawn was still hours away, and the storm was breaking sooner than anyone had planned. The Apache trail led them to an abandoned mission just before dawn. Sarah was barely conscious in the saddle when James helped her down, her face pale with exhaustion and pain. "Rest here," he said, guiding her into the crumbling adobe structure. "I'll check the perimeter." But as he turned to go, Sarah clutched his arm. "James, in the church records, Thomas said—" She slumped against him, the words trailing off as another contraction seized her. James eased her onto a wooden pew, his heart racing. What about church records? Thomas had never mentioned. The mission's small office still held its shelves of leather-bound books, decades of baptisms, marriages, and deaths recorded in fading ink. James lit a lamp, scanning the spines until he found the property records Thomas would have known about. The book fell open to a page marked by an envelope, sealed with wax, and addressed to Sarah in Thomas's familiar hand. James's hand shook slightly as he brought it to her. Sarah tore it open, her breath catching as she read. "Oh, Thomas, you clever man. What is it?" "A will, but not just any will." She handed him the papers, her eyes bright with tears or triumph. "Read it." James held the pages close to the lamp, his eyes widening as he took in the implications. The document was indeed a will, but not Thomas Mitchell's. It was Herbert Clayton's father's last testament, dated 20 years ago. "This can't be real," he breathed. "It is." Sarah's voice was strained but certain. "Thomas found it hidden in the mission records. That's why Clayton had him killed." The will's terms were clear. Upon his death, Old Man Clayton had left half his ranch lands to the local tribes who had historically used the grazing grounds. His son Herbert had been explicitly forbidden from selling or developing the land designated for the railroad. "Clayton never probated this will," James said, understanding dawning. "He buried it and took control of everything. And when Thomas discovered it—" Sarah gasped as another contraction hit. James knelt beside her, clasping her hand. "Easy now. Just breathe." When the pain eased, she continued. "Thomas was gathering proof. He knew about Clayton poisoning, his father, about the hidden will, about all of it. That's why—" She swallowed hard. "That's why they couldn't let him live." A sound outside made James straighten, gun drawn. But it was Ben Crawford who burst through the door, his young face flushed with excitement. "Marshal Cooper's coming. He's—" The boy stopped short, taking in Sarah's condition. "Mrs. Mitchell." "I'm fine," she managed, though they all knew it was a lie. "Did you reach Cheyenne?" Ben nodded. "Marshal's riding with a full complement. They'll be here by noon." His eyes fell on the papers in James's hand. "What's that?" "Evidence." James carefully folded the will, the real reason behind everything. Clayton didn't just want the railroad money, he was hiding his father's murder, hiding this will that would have stripped him of control. "Then we've got him." Ben's face lit up. "With this and the judge's letter, if we live to present it." James went to the window, scanning the lightening horizon. "Clayton's men will be close behind you." As if in answer, gunfire erupted outside. A bullet shattered the mission's window, sending glass spraying across the floor. "Back room," James ordered, helping Sarah to her feet. "Ben, get her clear." But Sarah pulled away from Ben's supporting arm. "The will, we need—" "I've got it." James drew both revolvers. "Go!" Ben half-carried Sarah through the door as James laid down covering fire. He could see riders circling the mission, at least 10 of them. More than he'd expected, more than they could fight off alone. In the back room, Sarah cried out, not in fear, but in pain, a different kind of pain. "James!" Ben's voice was high with panic. "The baby's coming!" Time seemed to slow as James weighed his options. The will in his pocket could destroy Clayton, bring justice for Thomas's murder. But Sarah? Another contraction's cry decided him. He burst into the back room, holstering his guns. "How far to the nearest help?" "Cooper's men are maybe 2 hours behind me," Ben said. But Dr. Anderson was following. More bullets splintered the adobe walls. They were out of time. "Ben!" James gripped the boy's shoulder. "You're the fastest rider here. Take the will. Take Clayton's letter about the judge. Get them to Cooper. But Mrs. Mitchell, I'll take care of her." James's voice softened as he looked at Sarah, pale but determined on her makeshift bed. "I made a promise." Sarah reached for his hand. "James, that will is everything we fought for." "No." He squeezed her fingers. "You and this child are everything. The rest is just paper." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Ben, go. Ride fast." The boy took the documents with shaking hands. "There's a back window. I can make it to my horse if you give." "Me covering fire?" James turned to Sarah one last time. "I have to help him get clear, then I'll be right back." "I know." Her smile was fierce through the pain. "I'm not going anywhere." The next few minutes were chaos. James emptied both revolvers, keeping Clayton's men down, while Ben made his escape. By the time he returned to the back room, Sarah was deep in labor. "Thomas taught me about birthing," she gasped between contractions. "In the doctor's kit. I know." James opened the leather case with steady hands. "I helped birth horses in Apache country. Can't be that different." Sarah's laugh turned into a groan. "James Hawkins, you say the most romantic things." Outside, Clayton's men had gone quiet, regrouping probably, planning their next move. But in this room, time had narrowed to just this. Sarah's breathing, James's quiet encouragement, and the miracle struggling to enter the world. The will that could destroy Clayton was riding away with Ben Crawford. But as James helped Sarah bring new life into the world, he knew they'd made the right choice. Some things were worth more than justice. Some promises meant more than vengeance. Thomas Mitchell's child was about to be born in an abandoned mission, with bullets in the walls and danger all around. But it would be born into love, into protection, into hope. And that, James realized, was what Thomas had wanted all along. The old storm lantern cast wavering shadows on the mission's adobe walls as Sarah fought through another contraction. James had found it hanging in the sacristy, its brass dulled by years, but its flame steady and strong. Like Sarah herself, he thought, watching her face in the gentle light. "Talk to me," she gasped when the pain eased. "Anything. Just keep talking." Outside, thunder rolled across the prairie. The spring storm that had been threatening all day was finally breaking. "Reminds me of another storm," James said, adjusting the lantern's flame. "Night I first met Thomas. Both of us caught out in weather like this, took shelter in old man Henderson's barn." He wiped Sarah's forehead with a damp cloth. "Thomas had that same look you do now, like nothing in heaven or earth could break him." A smile flickered across Sarah's face. "He never did know when to quit. Stubbornness must be catching." James checked the mission's barricaded windows. Clayton's men had fallen silent, but the storm would give them cover to move closer. "Rest while you can. Won't be long now." The lantern's light caught the tears on Sarah's cheeks. "James, if anything happens, don't." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her palm. "You're both going to be fine." But they both knew the odds. Sarah was hours from proper medical help, with Clayton's killers waiting outside, and a baby that wouldn't wait for rescue. Thunder cracked closer, and Sarah's grip tightened on his hand. "The letter," she said between breaths, "in Thomas's Bible. The one I never showed you. Save your strength. No, you need to know. Her eyes held his in the lantern light. Thomas wrote it the night before the fever took him. Said if anything happened, I should give it to you. James's heart clenched. Sarah, he knew James. About the poison, about Clayton. Knew they might come for him. Another contraction seized her, but she forced the words out. He wrote that we'd need you, that you were the only one he trusted to. She cried out as the pain peaked. James held her through it, his mind racing. Thomas had known he was marked for death, had tried to warn them, and still Clayton's men had reached him first. The lantern flame guttered as wind found gaps in the mission walls. Outside, horses shifted nervously in the growing storm. How many do you think are out there? Sarah asked, when she could speak again. Too many. James checked his ammunition. One more time. But Cooper's men are coming. We just have to hold out till then. A bullet smacked into the adobe near the window, sending dust dancing in the lantern light. James doused the flame quickly, plunging them into storm-dark shadows. They're testing us, he whispered, seeing if we'll fire back, waste ammunition. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness. Like Thomas said in his letter, you always could. Read a fight better than anyone. Sarah, James's voice was rough. That letter, what else did he say? Before she could answer, the mission's front door exploded inward. Lightning flashed, illuminating Clayton himself in the doorway, flanked by gun-toting riders. Time's up, folks. Clayton's cultured voice carried over the storm. Enough blood's been spilled. Come out now, let's discuss this like civilized people. James stayed low, gun ready. Like you discussed things with Thomas Mitchell? Ah, Hawkins. Still carrying that tired torch of revenge? Clayton stepped further inside, rain dripping from his expensive coat. Thomas made his choice, just like that boy you sent running with my father's will. My men are already after him, you know. Such a waste of young life. Sarah's fingers dug into James's arm. Ben, sweet, brave Ben, who'd ridden into the storm with their evidence and their hopes. You won't catch him, James said with more confidence than he felt. That boy rides like the wind. Perhaps, but you've got more immediate concerns, don't you? Clayton's smile was cold in another lightning flash. A woman in labor, no doctor, surrounded by armed men. How long do you think you can protect her? The question hit James like a physical blow. He could hold them off, maybe, but Sarah needed help, needed more than he alone could give. The storm lantern lay within reach, its metal still warm. One shot would send burning oil across the entrance, buy them time. But the risk to Sarah. James, her voice was barely a whisper. Whatever happens, I trust you. Thunder crashed overhead as James made his decision. Slowly he stood, hands raised. All right, Clayton, let's talk. He kept his body between the doorway and Sarah. But first, tell your men to back off, way off. Clayton gestured, and his riders retreated into the rain. Wise choice. Now, about that will... Ben has it. James took a careful step forward. Along with proof you murdered your father, and Thomas Mitchell, and God knows how many others. Allegations require witnesses. Clayton's hand moved to his coat. Dead men tell no tales. The move was smooth, practiced, but James was already diving aside as Clayton's derringer barked. The bullet caught him high in the shoulder instead. Of the heart, what happened next was lost in thunder and gunfire and Sarah's scream. James rolled, coming up shooting. Clayton staggered backward into the storm. More shots exploded from the darkness, and through it all, impossibly, came the cry of a newborn baby. James crawled to Sarah's side, his wounded arm leaving blood on the floor. In the next lightning flash he saw her face, exhausted, triumphant, lit with a fierce joy that stole his breath. A boy, she whispered, strong like his father. James pressed his bandana against his shoulder, trying to stem the bleeding. Clayton's hit, but his men will have to wait. Sarah's voice was iron beneath the tenderness. Help me with your son. The words stopped him cold. Sarah, she smiled through her tears. Read Thomas's letter when this is over. He knew this day would come, knew who this child's father should be. Outside, The storm raged on. Clayton's men were regrouping, gathering for another assault. They had minutes at most. But as James helped Sarah clean and wrap the squalling infant, as he held them both close in the darkness, he felt something shift inside him. The love he'd carried for 10 years, the guilt, the grief, all of it crystallized into a single, burning purpose. He would protect this family or die trying. The storm lantern lay broken by the door, its oil seeping into the dirt floor, but they didn't need its light anymore. Dawn was coming, and with it, justice. James pressed the old silver dollar into Sarah's hand as gunfire rattled the mission walls. Thomas gave me this, day I pinned on the badge, said it was lucky. His voice roughened. Kept me alive in Apache country. Now it's yours. Sarah clutched, the coin warm from his pocket as she cradled their newborn son. We make our own luck, James Hawkins. Maybe. He checked his wounded shoulder, grimacing. But we'll take what we can get. Clayton's men are moving around back. Won't be long. The storm still raged outside, but dawn was breaking. Through gaps in the adobe walls, they could see riders' shadows in the lightning flashes. How many rounds left? Sarah asked. 6 in the Colt, 4 in the Winchester. James's smile was grim. Not enough. The baby whimpered, and Sarah tucked him closer. She could feel Thomas's lucky coin pressing against her palm, its worn surface smooth with age and handling. The same coin that had saved James's life more than once, if the stories were true. A voice carried through the storm. Hawkins, last chance. Throw out your guns. Walk away. No one else has to die here. Except Sarah and the baby, James muttered. He raised his voice. Sorry, boys. Better men than you have tried. The answer came in another volley of bullets. James returned fire carefully, making each shot count. A cry of pain told them at least one found its mark. James, Sarah's voice, was steady. In Thomas's letter, he wrote about this coin. Not the time, Sarah. Yes, the time. She caught his arm as he moved to check the back window. He said you gave it to him the day he proposed to me. Said you told him to use it, make his own luck. James went still. I remember. He knew what it meant. You giving up your lucky peace. Giving up, she swallowed hard. Giving up me. Sarah, please. No. Listen. Her fingers tightened on the coin. Thomas knew he was marked. Knew Clayton would come for him eventually. That's why he wrote that letter. Why he wanted you to have it. To have us. A bullet splintered the window frame, sending James diving for cover. When he came up shooting, his face was wet. Rain or tears, Sarah couldn't tell. Thomas Mitchell was the best man I ever knew, he said roughly. But he's gone, Sarah. And no lucky coin, no letter is going to change that. No. Sarah pressed the coin back into his hand. But it might change our future, if you're brave enough to take it. Their eyes met in the storm-dark room. Outside, Clayton's voice rose again. Burn them out! Burn it all! The smell of smoke reached them as torches arced through the rain. The old mission's timber roof wouldn't last long. James looked at the coin in his palm, then at Sarah and the child. Thomas's son, his son if Sarah spoke true, if he dared believe. Well, Sarah's smile was fierce through her exhaustion. Are you going to make your own luck, James Hawkins? He flipped the coin once, catching it with the same fluid grace she remembered from their youth. You always did know how to handle a stubborn man. Had practice with 2 of them. James tucked the coin away and checked his guns one final time. Back doors still clear. When I draw them off... No. Sarah struggled to her feet, the baby secure in one arm. We go together. Sarah? Together, she repeated. Or not at all. Another timber cracked overhead as the fire spread. They were out of time. Out of options. James's expression softened as he looked at them. The woman he'd loved for so long, the child that might be his own. Together then. He helped Sarah wrap the baby against the rain, then positioned himself at the door. Outside, horses stamped. Nervously in the growing light, Clayton's men were moving closer, expecting them to run from the flames. James touched the coin in his pocket one last time, not for luck now, but for memory, for Thomas, who'd known all along what this day would bring, for the second chance he'd been given. "Ready?" he asked softly. Sarah's free hand found his. Ready. The storm was breaking as they stepped out to face their fate, but they weren't running. Not anymore. Sarah felt the steady tick of her father's pocket watch against her heart, where she'd tucked it into her bodice. The old timepiece had been his last gift to her, given the day he died defending their first ranch from rustlers. "Time waits for no one," he'd said, "but it's how you spend it that matters." Now, crouched behind an overturned wagon with James, she could hear each tick counting down their chances. The baby was quiet against her chest, somehow sensing the need for silence. "Clayton's hit bad," James whispered, checking around the wagon's edge. "But he's got us pinned down." Thunder still rumbled, but the storm was passing. In the growing light, Sarah could see figures moving through the mission's courtyard. 5 men, maybe 6, all armed. She pulled out her father's watch, its gold. Case scratched, but hands still true. 6:15. How long before Cooper's men? Gunfire cut her off, bullets thudding into the wagon's wooden sides. James returned fire, his wounded shoulder making him wince. 2 down, he reported grimly, but they're working around behind us. Sarah touched the watch face, remembering. The mission well, if we can reach it. 2 exposed. Not if they're distracted. She met his eyes steadily. The watch, it's gold. In this light, understanding dawned on James's face. It'll catch the sun. Draw their fire while you circle around. Sarah pressed the timepiece into his hand. "My father always said timing was everything." James's fingers closed around the watch. "Sarah, we're running out of time." She nodded toward the mission, where smoke still rose from the burning roof. "Make it count." Their eyes held for a moment. Then James leaned in, his lips brushing hers with shocking gentleness. "I always did love your crazy plans." Before she could respond, he was moving. Sarah watched him slip away through the pre-dawn shadows, her father's watch gleaming faintly in his hand. The baby stirred, and she soothed him quickly. "Hush now, little one. Your papa's about to do something either very brave or very foolish." She smiled through sudden tears, "just like your first father would have done." A shout went up as James made his move. Sarah saw the watch flash in the strengthening light, heard Clayton's men redirect their fire. 2 shots, 3, all focused on that golden glimmer. She gathered her strength and ran for the well. The courtyard seemed endless, every step an eternity. Behind her, guns roared. She heard James's Winchester bark twice, heard a cry of pain that wasn't his. Then she was at the well, dropping behind its stone wall, just as bullets sparked off the rocks. "Enough!" Clayton's voice was weaker now, but still carrying authority. "Enough blood. Hawkins, think about the woman, the child. You really want to orphan that baby." "Funny," James called back. "You didn't worry about that when you poisoned Thomas Mitchell." Sarah risked a glance around the well. Clayton stood in the mission doorway, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. 3 of his men were down. The rest had scattered for cover. The watch glinted again, drawing more fire. But Sarah saw what Clayton's men didn't, James working his way around behind them, using the distraction. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Time waits for no one." "It's over, Clayton," she shouted, making him turn toward her voice. The evidence. It's all riding for Cheyenne. You've lost. Nothing's over." Clayton raised his gun. "Not while I—" The rest was lost in thunder. Not from the storm this time, but from James's Winchester. Clayton's last 2 men fell. Before they could turn, Clayton himself staggered, his gun dropping from nerveless fingers. He looked almost surprised as he sank to his knees. "Timing," he muttered, "should have killed you all sooner." Then he pitched forward into the mud, and the courtyard fell silent except for the ticking of Sarah's father's watch. James emerged. From the shadows, the timepiece still clutched in his left hand. His right arm hung useless, blood soaking his sleeve, but his eyes were clear as he crossed to Sarah. "You're hurt," she said. "Nothing that won't heal." He helped her up, careful of the baby. "You?" Sarah checked their son, finding him somehow still sleeping peacefully. "We're fine. All of us." James held out the watch. In the dawn light, its scratched case seemed to glow. "Your father would have been proud. Of both of us," she said softly, taking the timepiece. Its steady ticking felt like a heartbeat against her palm. "We made our own timing in the end." Together, they looked east as hoofbeats approached. Marshal Cooper's men were finally arriving, justice coming with the dawn. The watch marked each moment as their world shifted, darkness giving way to light, danger yielding to hope. Time waited. For no one, her father had said. But sometimes, if you were brave enough and true enough, it gave you a second chance. 1 month later, Sarah stood on the rise overlooking her land, watching men lay the foundation stones for her new cabin. The granite blocks were solid, dependable, wider and deeper than the original foundation had been. "Building it stronger this time," James said, coming to stand beside her. His arm was still in a sling, but healing well, something that'll last. Below them, Ben Crawford directed the work crew with surprising authority. The boy had become a man the night he'd outrun Clayton's men, carrying evidence to Marshal Cooper. Through the storm, now he was overseeing the rebuilding of everything Clayton had tried to destroy. "News from Cheyenne," James continued. "Judge Wilson's confession secured convictions for all of Clayton's remaining men. The land will be distributed according to the old will, half to the tribes, the rest returned to the families who were driven out." Sarah shifted the baby in her arms, smiling as he grabbed for James's finger. They'd named him Thomas James. Mitchell, carrying both his father's names and legacy. "Found something in the old foundation," James said quietly. He pulled a charred piece of paper from his pocket. Thomas's last letter, the one he'd written the night before Clayton's poison took him. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The words were faded, but clear. "My dearest Sarah, by the time you read this, I'll likely be gone. Clayton's men were watching today, and I saw death in their eyes. But I've made preparations, hidden the proof of their crimes where they'll never find it. James will come when you need him. I've written to him, though he's too stubborn to have." Replied, "Trust him, Sarah. He loves you as I do, and he'll love our child as his own. I'm not afraid to die protecting what matters, but I am afraid to leave you alone. That's why I know James will return, because he could never leave you unprotected any more than I could. Build something new from these ashes, my love. Build it with him. Forever yours, Thomas." Sarah pressed the letter to her heart, tears falling freely. He knew. All along, he knew. About Clayton's plans, about my feelings, about everything. James touched the baby's cheek gently. "Thomas Mitchell was always the wisest of us." Below, the foundation stones continued to take shape. Solid granite, each block carefully placed, creating something new from the ruins of the old. "Marshal Cooper asked me to take up the badge again," James said after a moment. "Said they need a sheriff who can't be bought." Sarah studied his face in the afternoon light. "And?" "Told him I had other obligations." His eyes met hers. "Unless you think Paradise Valley needs a sheriff." "Paradise Valley needs a lot of things." Sarah looked out over the land that had seen so much pain and triumph. Good men, strong foundations, second chances. James's hand found hers, warm and sure. "Then I'll stay, if you'll have me." Sarah thought of Thomas's letter, of his last gift to them both, permission to build something new from the ashes of the old. The foundation below would support more than just a cabin. It would support a future. "We'll build it together," she said softly. "Something that will last." The baby cooed, reaching for the glint of James's silver marshal's badge, now retired. Behind them, the foundation stones settled into place, solid as the earth itself. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the strongest foundations were built on loss. And love on endings and beginnings all mixed together. Thomas had known that, had planned for it in his own way. As the sun set over Paradise Valley, Sarah Mitchell stood between past and future, between what was lost and what could be. The foundation stones below were just the beginning. They had a lifetime to build the rest. The cradle stood in the corner of the newly finished cabin, its hand-carved wood gleaming in the firelight. James ran his fingers over the smooth pine, touching the intricate designs he'd worked into its headboard. Wild horses running free, like the ones that still roamed Paradise Valley. Thomas would have loved it, Sarah said from the doorway, their son sleeping peacefully in her arms. He always said our children would be as wild and free as those horses. Smart man. James stepped back to admire his handiwork. The cradle had taken weeks to complete, each detail carved in the evenings. After long days of rebuilding, "Think the little one will approve?" Sarah crossed to lay the baby in his new bed. Thomas James Mitchell stirred briefly, then settled with a contented sigh. "I'd say that's approval enough." They stood together, watching their son sleep. The cabin around them was nearly finished, stronger than the old one, with thick walls and wide windows. Like the cradle, every piece had been crafted with care and purpose. "Received word from the Hendersons today," James said quietly. "They're coming home. Others too. Clayton's land grab didn't just fail, it brought the community together." Sarah leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his arm. "Paradise Valley's healing, thanks to you, your courage, your strength." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I was a fool to ever leave. Maybe we needed that time apart." Sarah touched the cradle's carved horses, to appreciate what we could build together. Outside, spring was turning to summer. The valley was green, with new growth, and cattle grazed peacefully where battles had been fought. Life went on as it always did. "Ben Crawford asked permission to court Mary Henderson when they return," Sarah said, smiling. "Young love, blooming from all this strife." Speaking of love, James turned her gently to face him. "The Reverend's riding circuit next week." "Thought, maybe." Sarah's eyes softened. "Are you asking me something, James Hawkins?" "Trying to." He took her hands in his. "Not looking to replace Thomas. Never could. But maybe we could honor his last wishes. Build something new, something—" "Yes." She stretched up to kiss him, stopping his stammering. "The answer's yes." The baby made a small sound in his sleep, and they both turned to check on him. The cradle rocked slightly, soothing him back to deeper dreams. "One condition," Sarah said, her eyes twinkling. "No more running away when things get difficult." James pulled her close again. "No more running," he promised. "This is home now, for all of us." Through the window, they could see the wild horses on the ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun, free and strong, just like the family they were building. The cradle James had carved would hold more children someday. The cabin would ring with laughter and love. Paradise Valley would thrive again, its people bound together by shared struggle and triumph. But for now, in this quiet moment, they simply stood together watching their son sleep in his new cradle, surrounded by carved horses that would run forever free. Life wasn't perfect. There would be challenges ahead, wounds still healing, memories, both sweet and bitter, but they would face it all together, building something stronger than what had been lost, just as Thomas had known they would. 5 years later, the photographer from Cheyenne adjusted his camera one final time, peering at the family grouped on the cabin's front porch. "Hold still now," he called from beneath his black cloth. "This new process takes a minute, but the results are worth it." Sarah sat in the wooden rocker James had made her, their 2-year-old daughter Emma asleep in her lap. 5-year-old Thomas stood proudly beside them, straight and tall, like both his fathers. And James, one hand resting on Sarah's shoulder, watched over them all. On the wall behind them hung Thomas Mitchell's last letter, framed alongside the worn silver marshal's badge and Sarah's father's watch. Pieces of their past, preserved but not controlling their future. "Almost there," the photographer called. "Just another moment." Sarah felt James's hand tighten gently on her shoulder. They were both thinking of another photograph, taken so Long ago, three young people with uncertain futures, their hearts full of unspoken words. But this portrait would tell a different story. A story of love lost and found, of courage and redemption, of a family forged through fire and built on the strongest foundation of all, truth. There, the photographer said finally, a perfect capture of Paradise Valley's finest family. Later, when the portrait was finished and framed, they hung it in the cabin's main room. 3 generations of hopes and dreams, preserved in silver and light. And in the distance, wild horses still ran free across Paradise Valley, just as Thomas had wished.